Take a look at this. This is wild Africa, 10,000 years ago. Before the pyramids, before the wheel, before cities and empires, a thriving lagoon on the shore of a great lake. The water stretches to the horizon, and the banks are warm and fertile, covered in greenery. It's a place where people could live, and live well, by the standards of that time. A group of hunter-gatherers catch fish in quiet backwaters and collect roots and fruits. In the evenings, they share stories by the fire. Children play in the sand, while dogs, already domesticated, lazily bask in the sun. No states, no armies, no borders. A pre-civilizational world is simple and peaceful. Or so we thought, until archaeologists uncovered the remains of something horrifying. An ancient massacre among hunter-gatherers. 8500 BC. Metals haven't been mastered yet, but stone tools are becoming more complex and efficient. Polished axes appear, along with flint knives and scrapers for dressing hides. Yet people still live in small groups, constantly moving from place to place. The main threats come from nature: wild beasts, sudden cold spells, droughts. Humanity still leads a nomadic life. Tribes make long-term campsites in picturesque, resource-rich areas. One such place was Nataruk. Today, it's a scorched desert with nothing but sand, heat, and wind. But 10,000 years ago, Nataruk was entirely different. Lush vegetation, fertile land, and the vast Lake Turkana, much larger back then than it is today. The water reached beyond the horizon, and a broad sandy beach stretched along the shore. Animals came here to drink, fish teemed in the shallows. Just a few miles away lay different lands, wild, forested river deltas. More dangerous territory, more predators, more threats. That made Nataruk the perfect spot, a coveted oasis for all, the best fishing grounds, the best hunting trails. Archaeologists have found numerous animal bones here: elephants, hippos, zebras, antelopes, crocodiles, hyenas, even lions. And along with them, evidence of hunters, bone harpoons, pottery shards, traces of butchering. They fished, hunted, cut meat, and lit fires. People would stay here, and based on the evidence, for quite a while. It seemed nothing could ruin this idyllic life. But these lands were way too desirable. And the competition wasn't just from wild animals coming to drink. For other groups of ancient humans, settling here meant survival. But what do you do when a place you need is already occupied, and the tribe that claimed it had no intention of leaving? The answer came thousands of years later in 2012 in Kenya. Archaeologists were excavating Nataruk as part of the In Africa project. On a fairly large site, about 650 to 330 feet, they found a significant number of human bones. By their estimates, a total of 27 individuals. These are the remains of people who had once camped on the shores of Lake Turkana 10,000 years ago. The archaeologists began studying the bones. At first, they assumed it was simply an ancient burial site. The logic was straightforward. If there were human remains, they must have been buried. Not one seriously considered the possibility of anything else. But when the findings were studied closely, the pieces started falling into place. These people had not been buried. They were left exactly where they had fallen. Death had taken them suddenly, and the earth preserved them just as they were. Out of the 27 individuals, 12 skeletons were more or less intact, but 10 of them showed clear signs of violent death. They had dozens of injuries, and not from wild animals. The first skull they uncovered was face down, but once it was carefully cleaned, the archaeologists saw something horrifying. There were marks of a blow from a heavy, sharp object, straight to the face. The impact was so strong that one side of the skull caved in while the other split outward. Then the person was struck again, this time on the side of the head. The injury was so severe that the upper jaw shifted while the lower jaw remained in place. The neck vertebrae were also broken. This person simply collapsed and remained where they fell, right in the shallows of the lagoon. Another skeleton was found a bit further away. The body had literally grown into the lake sediments, making it difficult to extract. Again, the person lay face down. The shape of the skull clearly indicated a violent death. A flint arrowhead was lodged in the bone. And these were far from the only horrifying discoveries. The deeper the team dug, the more terrifying the picture became. Among the dead were men, women, and children. Judging by the bones, one of the women had been in the late stages of pregnancy. No one had been spared, and based on the positions of some of the remains, it appears that these people had been tied up. So what happened here? Could this be one of the first confirmed instances of warfare between tribes? Why? Just imagine it. Early morning. Women are cooking. Children are playing nearby. The men return from a hunt, carrying large game. Yep, the hunt was a huge success. Then, snap. The distant sound of branches breaking. The women freeze. Children cling to their mothers. The men peer into the woods. What is it? Predators? Not quite. A moment later, people emerge from the thicket with grim faces and drawn weapons. The attack is sudden. The tribe is greatly outnumbered by the attackers. The entire tribe is wiped out in minutes. Lives that had just been in full swing are cut short in an instant, leaving only traces of tragedy that archaeologists would uncover thousands of years later. Until then, it was widely believed that warfare began with the rise of sedentary life, with the emergence of villages, food storage, and crops that needed defending. Why did scientists believe that? They looked at examples of modern-day hunter-gatherer societies that still exist in parts of South America and Africa. Warfare between groups is rare among them. Some might say, just find remains of a battle and you'll know. No remains, no war. But it's not that simple. If a tribe didn't build permanent settlements or cemeteries and keep moving from place to place, the chances of finding evidence of an ancient massacre are close to zero, until this case. Whatever the reason, this discovery completely changed the way we perceive one of the fundamental questions in human history. When did everything change forever? When did isolated skirmishes turn into real warfare? Planned, organized, deliberate? Paleontologist Marta Mirason-Lar, who led the study, suggests the Nataruk massacre may have resulted from an attempt to seize resources, territory, women, children, food stored in pots, whose value is similar to those of later food-producing agricultural societies, among whom violent attacks on settlements became part of life. It seems that cruelty towards others wasn't an accident. Yes, maybe war really is part of our nature, but can one discovery prove that? In fact, there are more such discoveries, and one of them is over 13,000 years old. Let's travel to Sudan, to Jebel Sahabah, some 13,400 years ago, before agriculture and houses were around, roughly 3,000 years before the massacre at Nataruk. Just nature and man against man. Everything followed the same grim pattern. The remains were first discovered in the 1960s at an ancient burial site. At the time, researchers noted signs of violence on 20 skeletons. But then, in 2021, a team of French scientists took a fresh look. They conducted a detailed reanalysis, and the number of violent deaths doubled. The researchers found injuries on 41 out of the 61 skeletons. How could that be? The answer lies in a new approach. Instead of a superficial inspection, they meticulously examined every bone. Most of the injuries were caused by projectile weapons. Some bones still contained embedded stone fragments. These fragments resemble the tips of arrows or spears. Among the wounded were men, women, and children. The same pattern seen in Nataruk. No one was spared. And yet, the remains from Sudan differ from those in Kenya. The violence here was not a one-off event. It was the constant backdrop of life. Warfare was the norm. Analysis showed these people had survived multiple episodes of violence. In other words, this was not the result of one sudden massacre, but a recurring conflict. These people bore marks of old, healed wounds, as well as others that had ultimately killed them. How could that happen? There are several theories. The first suggests a protracted conflict between tribes. Most likely, other groups of hunter-gatherers lived in the area. Nomadic groups with no villages or borders, yet beset by repeated raids. Not a single raid, but a series of skirmishes, where survivors were struck again. Competition for water, fish, and a good spot by the river. It's also possible that people from one group were enslaved, subjected to violence, and later killed. Another theory suggests intra-tribal violence, struggles for status, women, or food within the same group. But one more question remains unanswered. Could such deep wounds heal with no surgeons or bandages? The answer is they could. If the person didn't die immediately from blood loss or infection, the body began to recover on its own. Bone would fuse back together, scars would form, and the person would return to battle. Secondly, and this is crucial, hunter-gatherers cared for one another. Someone would bring food, keep watch, and help the wounded with daily tasks. It was easier to survive as a group. Thirdly, there were some natural remedies, not pills of course, but plants, clay, tree bark, and finally, the environment itself. It may sound strange, but life in nature had a hidden advantage. No infections from filthy city streets, no sewage, no overcrowding. Fewer diseases meant higher chances of survival, especially if you were strong and hadn't been killed immediately. The conclusion is simple. You don't need an operating room to heal a wound. You just need to survive the first few days, and perhaps, most importantly, not be alone. Even then, 13,000 years ago, that was possible. This truly is a unique excavation. Scientists note that we know of no other burial site from that era showing such levels of violence. Maybe it's a fluke, or maybe no one had ever looked this closely before. With deeper analysis, more traces of ancient conflict may yet come to light. In 1971, archaeologists began excavations on the eastern bank of the Euphrates River in Syria. This site was an ancient settlement known as Tel Meribet. 4 significant layers were explored, covering a period of time from pre-pottery Neolithic to the late Natufian culture. Researchers unearthed round houses built of stone held together with clay. They also uncovered remains of rectangular structures nearby that were built later. This indicates gradual development and changes in the settlement's layout. In addition, the team also found grains of primitive wheat, as well as barley and peas, evidence that people were transitioning from gathering wild plants to practicing agriculture. 3 years later, in layers dating around 8300 to 8200 BC, archaeologists uncovered a very unusual burial site. In total, 10 burials were discovered, but 4 of them really stood out. These belong to a pivotal period in history, the moment when hunter-gatherers began settling down and cultivating crops, a turning point scholars refer to as the pre-pottery Neolithic A. One burial from that time was located beneath a stone-paved walkway between 2 round buildings, a detail fascinating in itself. It would later be simply called Grave Number 3. Above the body, archaeologists found a grinding stone, which may have held ritual significance. The remains were taken to a museum in Damascus, where they remained untouched for years. But in 2017, more than 4 decades later, researchers revisited them with modern technology. A French team conducted a new study and published the results in Palais-Orient. They re-examined every bone using X-rays, CT imaging, and 3D modeling. And then the story got far more intriguing. When archaeologists examined the skeleton's chest area, they noted damage near the 10th thoracic vertebra. It turned out that a flint arrowhead was lodged in the bone. It had entered at an angle of about 18 degrees, pierced nearly 1 inch deep, and remained stuck there. The tip was broken, and there were no signs of healing on the bone. This meant the arrow was shot while the person was still alive, and the injury was fatal. In simpler terms, it was a homicide. Or perhaps an accident? Researchers reconstructed the arrow's trajectory and even 3D printed a model of the vertebra with the embedded projectile. Unfortunately, they couldn't determine the individual's sex as the pelvic bones were too damaged. But based on the condition of other bones, such as clavicles, the scientists concluded that it was a mature adult. Although the skull, lower jaw, and limbs were missing, the spine and ribcage were intact, which was enough to start building hypotheses. The main question was, what really happened? Was this person accidentally shot while hunting, or was this a case of interpersonal violence? The first theory is supported by the lifestyle of ancient communities. People actively hunted, used bows and arrows. In theory, yes, it could have been a tragic accident. But the second theory, deliberate murder, also seems plausible. The arrow hit the spine directly, at an angle that would have required a precise shot. Perhaps there was a conflict, and this person was the victim of an attack, a feud, a personal dispute, or a struggle for resources. Scholars emphasize such finds are extremely rare. Weapons almost never preserve in bone, and an arrowhead lodged in vertebra is something nearly unprecedented. Moreover, in the context of that time, we simply don't know how common such conflicts were. What's also notable is the absence of any signs of fortifications or defensive walls. No burned layers, no mass graves, no other traces of violence, just one skeleton, one arrow. There's no direct evidence that this was an accident or a genuine mistake by fellow hunters. But discoveries like this show that war and armed conflict between humans existed long before cities and advanced civilizations ever emerged. Does this mean war is part of who we are? That cruelty isn't a glitch, but a feature? Not an evolutionary mistake, but rather its tool? Perhaps so. It seems that even in the earliest chapters of our history, the greatest threat to humans was other humans.